The new Gears 4 gameplay was recently shown at E3, so I decided to play through the entire trilogy to see if all the hype was really worth it. I enjoyed the series, with each entry getting better than the last. The first one was clearly an experiment on how to implement cover-based shooting and the grim world that the game existed in. The second was even more cinematic and refined some of the gameplay's rough edges. My favorite though is Gears of War 3. It isn't really deep, it's constantly extinguishing all glimmers of introspection or character development. However, from a gameplay perspective, Gears of War 3 is one of the best, most fleshed out there is. It just feels so damn good. It's so finely tuned for the best game possible. The active reload is back, but it's changed up. The sweet spot used to be in the same spot for all the guns, but this time it's all over the place. Now the second-to-second gameplay strategy is a bit more complex than the others. Gears of War pioneered the cover-based shooting mechanic, sorry Killswitch, and with this one, Epic made a lot of the cover destructible, forcing players to have to switch it up when the cover they're behind just blows up. Also, the game feel is fantastic. The way that you bounce in and out of cover, the way you sprint and change cover just feels so awesome. Another thing about Gears of War 3 is the ridiculous amount of variety it has. First, let's talk guns.
Guns. Lots of guns.
The most prominent of the bunch are the hit scans. A hit scan weapon is a weapon that fires projectiles at an infinite speed, so wherever the player points, the bullet will hit there almost instantaneously. Modern military shooters are filled with these. In most games that primarily use hit scans, it's less about how you shoot a gun and more about how you maneuver an area because, look at this. There's not much discernible difference between 10 different assault rifles. They're all automatic and shoot in relatively the same fashion. In Gears of War, however, every hit scan weapon is radically different from the next, so the player has to know how to fire them to take advantage of them. The Lancer has moderate damage and really low recoil, making it really good for beginners to pick it up. The Retro Lancer is much stronger, but the spread in recoil is out of control. And the Hammer Burst is a semi-automatic. 3 assault rifles, 3 wildly varying ways to play. If we had a graph of, say, damage and range, each weapon would occupy a different spot. Filling in the rest of the graph for hit scans would be the Gnasher, the Sawed-Off, the Longshot, and the secondaries. Then we have the projectile weapons, which add an extra layer to the combat because players have to take into account the time it takes for a projectile to reach an enemy and how it travels. For example, the Torque Bow has a really long charge up time, so the player has to take that into account to take down people. There's also the Digger Launcher, which shoots a projectile underground and goes towards the enemy for as long as you hold down the button. It's almost like an adult Ratchet and Clank. But having a variety of guns won't matter if you don't have a variety of awesome enemies. There are 3 types of enemies: mirrors, flushers, and pinners. Mirrors are enemies that function like the players. They have a variety of weapons, they can take cover, flank, stuff like that. So any variant of the drones basically fit this criteria. Flushers are enemies that try to get players out of cover. They're usually really fast moving and travel in packs. These are things like the Polyps, the Wretches, and the Tickers. Pinners are basically giant brutes that do a lot of damage and take a lot of damage. They encourage players to stay in cover. This is like the Drudges, the Berserkers, the Boomers, and what have you. So all of these enemy types work together to create really dynamic scenarios. All the developer has to do is change up the way they combine the different enemy types. Like in this situation, the Gunkers are throwing these huge balls of explosive emulsion, which is pinning down the player. As the Gunker is doing this, the drones are slowly making their way forward to take down the crew. However, the developers give you a way to combat this by giving you a sniper on this platform, giving you a strategy that you can take. Finally, I want to talk about palette cleansers. What these are basically breathers between the minute-to-minute combat, something to break up the stop and pop gameplay. A lot of games do this, but the thing about Gears 3 is that it has palette cleansers in every single aspect of the game. So we talked about guns earlier, and they have another section called the Specials that act as palette cleansers to the regular hit scans that the players is used to. These weapons barely pop up in the campaign, but when they do, it gets crazy and weird and helps the gameplay to not get too stale. Each of these have very special conditions for them to be useful, making the player get out of their comfort zone. It's the same with the enemies. There's these creatures that pop up every once in a while in the campaign that completely change up the gameplay. There's the Blood Mounts, which have dudes riding them into battle. There's also airborne reavers, corpsers, ceripedes, brumox, siege beasts, and gas barges. All of these have really different behaviors from the regular enemies and have to be tackled in a certain way. Finally, there's set pieces and sections that break up the story. Are you getting tired of Marcus Phoenix? That's fine, because you get to play as the Coltrane and even have a Thrashball segment. Tired of walking? That's fine, you'll get into a giant field truck and defend it. Tired of land? You'll go into a submarine and fight a giant Leviathan. And speaking of the Leviathan, there's also a bunch of bosses in the game too. There's the Leviathan, the Corpser with all her Corpser babies, there's the Tempest, and even a throwback to the original Gears with the Lambent Zerker. There's just so much awesome stuff in this game. Just the variety of weapons, enemies, set pieces, bosses. You can tell that everything was tailored and cared about for every minute of this game. There's no real section that bogs the pacing down. That's why I love this game so much and why I'm a huge fan of the franchise now. I'm just really hoping that the next game could add things to the weaknesses of Gears, like the more emotional elements and the character moments. That's when Gears will elevate from a great game to an amazing one. Thanks for watching.